What happens if we dare to tear off the mask of professionalism and actually risk showing up for real? I'm your host, Miriam Hartness, and this is Unprofessionalism.
The story that we see, the presentation people have, the disconnect between that and the substance underneath, the gap is widened so much that people now need the tools to understand what the difference is between the two. It's this continuous pursuit of understanding what makes up one's reality, what makes up truth, what makes up substance, what makes up authenticity. As things become more synthetic, I think more people will begin to care.
Rori, welcome to the show. I did mispronounce your name. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm super excited to have you on the show and to speak about, the intersection between technology, AI, and something as human as trust.
Yes.
And we'll get into the bits. And before that, I would like to invite you to share an anecdote of a time when you did something that could be considered unprofessional.
Well, unprofessional, definitely. I think that there have been many times, because I'm a direct person and I often say what I think right away, learning to sort of make sure I filter that. But I've definitely said things in environments where I probably should have kept my mouth quiet longer or waited till the right time to say it. I had that opportunity when I went to Accenture to build out at the origination a virtual reality studio, which turned into extended reality, which then became the metaverse. And you could say that the way I went about it in terms of, taking an unused office space and just creating an environment for new technology, new experiences, wasn't the standard approach that I don't think most people would have taken in terms of getting the full alignment and consensus. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it was successful because I was able to demonstrate and prove the value of this new technology before people might have been even ready to sort of get. Yeah.
Yeah. What a great opportunity.
Yeah, it was.
And how much did you have to push to get there? Because in hindsight, it then sounds easy. Oh, you're coming with a out of the box idea. People would have done it differently. What helped you to get people listen and say yes after all?
It's interesting. I've found throughout my career that a lot of times when I have ideas, which I do, it's a lot of ideas that may be different than what other folks are thinking. But in those environments, if you're able to sort of be proactive and do it yourself and do certain things, you can get pretty far, right? I remember I had a minimal budget. I'm not sure they knew that I would be like taking an office and tearing it down. And, I almost was like, let's just paint the office. I didn't quite do that myself, but I definitely transformed the environment, bought equipment, and all of those things weren't that difficult because I was doing it and I was able to bring in, one or two other individuals who were equally excited to sort of do something new. I think the challenge becomes after that, once you've created something and then you need to sort of market it or scale it or build it. And it was a really interesting learning lesson for me at that time because I was excited about creating this whole new space and this whole new capability. But simultaneously, at the same time, there was another individual who was focused more on sort of organizational alignment and selling the capability. And at the end of the day, I would say I wasn't as successful in that space because I was so building from ground up and community oriented and creating this capability versus focusing on the skill set of getting that sort of like alignment with the organization. And so when it became time for like growing it and being a full capable team lead, that's a different skill set. And that's where I guess you could say in terms of like professional dynamics and persuasion and the way you speak with people and address them. That's a whole different skill set than it is to just create and build. I found that I've been able to do things with minimal budget, not even a lot of budget. So you can definitely create change yourself and with a few people around you. But the ability to influence and encourage and bring along the rest of the organization, it's twofold. On one hand, when it's successful, there's a whole, way of posturing and making sure, you see it happen all the time in organizations, like who gets credit for what gets done and how they go about it. And as somebody who, I've always just focused on building and doing, and later in life in my career, I've obviously realized that the more senior you get, that just being the creator and builder of something is not enough. It's your ability to market and position it, and get alignment with the rest of the organization. I remember being told at some point while I was at Accenture, actually, you should understand the power of influence.
Mm.
And so influence and how how you get other people to sort of join your agenda, in a way that you stay part of it still is a lot tougher. Yeah.
Huh. What did you learn about that?
I mean,
Influencing?
I often think about how I've operated throughout my life in terms of, the ways I've gone about doing things, and would I do things differently? Because in some ways I want a bulldozer or something, I feel like I go in and I do it and I do it fast. And now that I'm operating as an independent of my own company, it's great because you can just do that. You don't need to rely on consensus and you don't need to build these alliances. But I certainly did learn how fragile is probably too extreme, but how much organizational alignment and connectivity you need. And then, I think that for folks like myself who do wind up going off and doing their own thing, it's very challenging for me to work within those systems. I completely understand why those systems exist, and I understand you need like collaboration and you want alignment and you want things to make sense. You don't want just absolute chaos, but the amount of time and energy spent to ensure the connectivity and the social dynamics and the emotional alignment it's pretty impressive. And maybe it comes more natural to some people, but I've always found that it's a little challenging. So I guess on one hand, I've learned that. I just wonder, I'm like, how would I incorporate that differently? When you just want to create and build and try new things, when that's your focus, how do you align that with what the organization wants, which is you to focus on, making those relationships and bonding. Yeah.
And I wonder whether this points actually at a systemic problem of large corporations innovating.
Yes.
Because as you say, it's a very different mindset that someone brings who is sharp and quick and agile and innovative and disruptive, as
Yes.
compared to someone who is more strategic, diplomatic in deployment and getting this huge ship running. And maybe also I'm thinking of founders who are very successful in the early days and then as a personality often fail once they reach the scale up stage.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's a different mindset for sure. I think some people go into a situation, and the traditional, I think, approach is, obviously profit driven. You don't want disruption. You don't want chaos. You want a system to operate and efficiently. And that's corporate America, right? And so I understand that. I think it's just challenging when your mindset is naturally like, how do I improve? How do I fix? How do I change? How do I look at something differently? How do I see things that other people haven't? And that happens to be my natural tendency, how I look at situations. And it's a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Yeah, I can see that. And you said at the beginning that you have the ability to say or to see what others don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can see how this gets you into uncomfortable situations.
Yes. I really underestimated most of my life how, I'm going to say the word again, fragile situations are. I underestimated how I thought if you went into a situation with a good idea, that was the most important thing. And it's not. I've learned that you need to have trust and foundation and before anyone's even willing to hear your good idea or understand your good idea. And so building those layers of foundation and trust. Another thing I remember realizing later in my life too is as somebody who focuses on innovation, and I've worked in the advertising and marketing world, the idea is always like, you're going to create this big presentation and show up to the client and they're going to be so excited and impressed. And then you realize over time, like no client wants you to show up with some big idea they've never heard of and, scare them away. They want the best innovation is like you're working closely, partnering with the client, letting them know exactly where your head is at as things move forward. So by the time you get to the point where you say, hey, why don't we use AI to completely revamp the way you sell, your retail or clothing, or they're prepared and they're ready and they'll buy in versus showing up and thinking like, yeah, I'm just going to tell you this great new idea and you're going to be blown away. It's not that. They need to feel the underlying trust and relationship before they can accept the idea, which is, it's different. I happen to be a different personality. I hear idea from, and the source doesn't always, for me, but I think that's not necessarily how not everybody works that way. So,
yeah, I can see that. Also, how people want to be part of the journey.
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I once read a study that the most successful change projects are those that focus in their communication on what remains the same.
Yes.
As it all.
Yes, exactly. It's the comfort level that people have. Yeah. That's a huge variable in terms of how you're perceived in organizations is the comfort level people have.
Yeah. And then how difficult for someone whose communication mindset is just, oh, we can be upfront, right? We don't need the between the lines and the guessing.
Yes.
If there's a lot of unwritten rules that we somehow have to follow in communication that that we're not learning at uni.
Yeah, no, and those rules, I guess I understand them, but I guess I still fight against them, right? I figure if I understood, accepted, and followed those rules, I probably could fit in a lot easier. But once again, if rules, rules are meant to be broken, right? There's that saying, but I do think that, yeah, I don't know. I've just always looked at any status quo as to why is it a status quo and why shouldn't it be changed? And that approach gets you into trouble.
Yeah, which is a pity if then everyone is seeking for innovation.
Yes.
And then unwilling to actually question the status quo. It's like, we do have an inherent problem here.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
You said something that made me wonder and curious. You said that when we approach or when we pitch an idea that is inherent in you, very different, and then there's more resistance. And I now wonder whether it would be different if the idea was generated or communicated not by a human, but by an AI.
I'm not sure there's a lot of studies right now about information that is being shared through AI versus human. Mm-hmm. And I actually just recently read a study that people who are predispositioned to be cynical trust AI, I think, and people who are more trusting don't trust AI, because the more trusting folks will trust humans. The people who are cynical, I think that might not be the right gist, but the point being is that I think that there's so much around human communication that people need and rely on, and we are far away from AI being able to be the final deliverer of that. I think as a tool, it's great. And personally, I mean, that's what my focus has been now, is using AI as a tool to get to the objectivity, the source of truth around information and content. So, there's a lot of the extraneous filters we've been seeing these last 10, 20 years around social and even the space that I was intimately involved in around, immersive media that have kind of distorted how people see information. I actually think AI can help in terms of, force the content to be much more upfront and clear in terms of what it's trying to communicate. That being said, the final deliverer of that information, I don't think we're at the point where people will trust AI itself yet. Everybody. And they shouldn't. I mean, AI is still for hallucinations, you need to do multiple, like I'm constantly double checking, triple checking data that I get through AI. But it's a great tool.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're just at the beginning.
Yeah.
You're working on the intersection between AI and trust.
Yeah.
What got you to this topic? And you started on your own. So you left corporate.
Yeah. Yeah.
To start this venture.
Yeah. It's really interesting because as I've said, I've spent my whole career in digital marketing, innovation, strategy, and got really involved in the quote unquote metaverse space for a while. And a lot of it has had to do with how we use content and experiences to communicate, to get information, to make up what your reality is. And I think in these last 5 to 10 years, I've noticed that reality has, as I said, become distorted. I think that with the metaverse, we were promising this world. I mean, Meta used to have these commercials where you'd be like in this distant world and like interacting with people. And it wasn't actually realistic, right? It was a promise. It wasn't real. And that led a lot of people to be very cynical about the space because I think there was an overpromise. Equally, in social media, with all the filters and AR and just so much that's been happening around polishing content and information, and now AI, where you can basically like generate and create websites, companies, people overnight that look and act and real. We were watching a soccer game the other day and we were like, wait a minute, this is not a soccer game. This is a game. And from far away, it looked like a soccer game, but up close, it was like actually a gameplay being broadcast on TV. I'm not sure what, but it was crazy. I was like, our reality is insane. So this idea of what is real, what is not, and how much content and experience help determine that. So that is kind of what I've been really focused on for a long time. And with the advent of AI, I was thinking, AI is creating all of this content that is not real, synthetic media. But at the same time, you could actually use AI to sort of dissect and filter out what the data of that content is and where that is coming from. And so wouldn't it be great if we could actually really understand what is real, what is not, what is the source of content, what is it trying to tell us in ways that are almost more objective than anything we've had before? And so is there a system or approach you could go about to do that? And that's what I've been focusing on, because I think we're at the point where the story that we see, the presentation people have, the disconnect between that and what is like the substance underneath, the gap is widened so much that people now need the tools to understand, what the difference is between the two. And so that's what I've been focused on. And it all, like I said, it's this kind of continuous pursuit of understanding what makes up one's reality, what makes up truth, what makes up substance, what makes up authenticity. And I think people, as things become more synthetic, I think more people will begin to care and are already starting to care about this.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something that just crossed my mind, that there's a reason why everyone is using AI to basically, how do you call that? Soft wash everything that they're doing. So now everything sounds the same, and everyone is trying to generate a picture of themselves that fits the kind of general desire. And thinking back of you and your honest, authentic communication that was so difficult to receive, where you then just ahead of your time, where we had to go into a world like now where it's difficult to actually realize what is true and what is not. Who is the person behind the image that we are seeing generated by AI or augmented by AI? But then what does it take to be really ready to be confronted with the reality that's maybe a little bit uncomfortable?
Yeah, yeah. And it's also interesting too, if you just look at society at large. I mean, I'm operating on the assumption that, identity, authenticity, individuality are important. There's a whole swath of society that wants to conform, that wants to look the same. I mean, look at plastic surgery in the last 10 years. There's a whole look of the way people should be and behave. And so, in as much as I think with AI, I'm like, wow, people are going to go crazy. And there is, in my LinkedIn feed, which is very selective to the bubble of the world I live in, right? Everyone is constantly debating in the creative space and marketing space, it's all looking the same and there's no difference. And AI is not solving for creativity and originality. But there's probably a whole portion of the world that's like just happy and fine with that conformity, And so I was just recently thinking about that. So I think AI can be used, it depends on the mindset or camp that you're coming from. Yeah.
It is actually a very good point. I haven't even thought about that. Oh, ignorant of me.
No, it's just
it's very true. And then where does the truth then begin, right? So where do you draw the line between what is still true and when does it start not to be true?
Yeah.
And who gets to define it?
I would say that I often say trust and truth together, but obviously they're different, right? And so early on when I started building this, what I call the trust stack, I said, we are in such a polarized world right now. I don't want to try to solve for what is true because that is really hard. I mean, there's certain things that I think are true just fundamentally, but we are at the point now where there are basic things that people would disagree on in terms of what is true. That being said, I don't think we are on an even playing field where people can determine how to establish whether something is true or not, meaning whether they can trust it. And I don't think we have the tools and capabilities and systems in place that enable people to figure out if something is true or they could trust it. Because a lot of information now, it's obscured what the source is. You don't know how it's generated. You don't know how it's been reshared. We see it with the news constantly that they're, quote unquote, deep fakes. And so there's the question of what is true, and then there's the question of what you can trust. And so something might not be true, but you can trust that it came from this source. So I think that, first of all, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's confusing. They're two different things, but I don't know if I can solve for true, but I definitely think you can solve for the variables that determine how you make a decision, right? And can you trust those variables and then come up with your own conclusion of what is true or not?
So it basically boils down to a reputation economy where I don't know whether it's the truth, as you said, but if I know who has generated that piece of information, then it depends whether this source is reliable, has a good reputation or not. And based on that, I will judge whether the likelihood of it being true is high or low.
I'd say it's the reputation economy plus data. Like, I think reputation has survived for a long time based upon word of mouth. I think now that is especially going back to AI, in terms of determining what the objectivity of information is, whether it's true or you can trust it, or getting to you need data, you need proof, you need
Mm.
verification, you need evidence, you need much more than just reputation, because we've seen reputation has been abused, right? Like in terms of social media. So I'd say it's definitely reputation, but it's a lot more than that too, right? Like you need to actually, I mean, it's really interesting when I talk to people about, you know, what I would expect as we move forward with content and how, you need things like where's the content coming from? Like Adobe has the Content Authenticity Initiative, which is a C2PA, which is basically watermark and credentials so people know where content's coming from. All of these tools, that verification tools that say that this is accurate, that this is correct, they seem maybe some way obvious, some way like unnecessary. But I think because the world has become so synthetic and content has become so disformed, that we need these tools, and we need them in ways that are more modern and more accessible
Mm-hmm.
beyond the typical tools that we've relied on in the past.
Yeah. And you opened a can of worms. What comes to my mind, amongst other things, is how we present ourselves in, especially our professional selves, on the internet, because there's very high competition for interesting jobs. So back in the days, a profession was professing a vow. We had these networks, associations. They would say, okay, you are capable, you get a stamp.
Yeah.
Today,
Oh my goodness, yeah.
people would get followship on YouTube or on Instagram, and suddenly they're professionals, air quotes. And then they can, it's never been easier to just pretend we had competence that we actually don't.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I think that is a pain point for so many people right now, especially if creators who are used to having their value recognized through what they create, and now AI is generating that, right? For lots of folks. And so on the surface it might look similar, but the origination or ideas underneath it are not. I actually wrote an article on Substack called Proof Over Popularity, based upon this idea that we've gotten into a world now where through social media and now with Gen AI, you've created these environments where, it's all about getting the likes, and how many articles have been written about LinkedIn algorithms and how do you generate more views. I wish I had the answer for that, because I think we are in a very difficult space right now where there is so much, as they call it, slop. There's a lot. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff out there, and it's very, very hard for people to distinguish between what is quality and what is not. And once again, not to rotate back to what I'm working on, but that's exactly what I'm trying to solve for, which is how do you distinguish on an experience and service level what is quality, what is real, what is not just based upon, something looking good or looking pretty or looking polished, but what actually has the research, the data, the product, the service behind it that you can count on, that you could rely on. And the ways we've done that in the past are no longer sufficient. And, I think we all complain about likes, and we all know likes are paid for it and views are paid for it. We haven't yet figured out a better way for people to distinguish, quality from not. And so that to me is one of the things we say. There's a thing, it's not just visibility, it's credibility, right? That's kind of what I'm focused on.
And how do you create that in these days while we're still waiting for your product?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, as well, incentives and motives too. When I talk to people about, what I'm working on, a lot of people say, "Oh, that's great. That's really great." How does that drive money? How does that drive profit? And it goes back to what's your goal, right? And so there's a reason that the systems are set up the way they are right now. There's a reason companies communicate and market in certain ways, and it's profitable, right? And so I do think what's interesting is I speak to colleagues or friends who are at leading companies, and what I have heard, which I think, is helpful, is that a lot of them do try to be, credible and trustworthy and and really follow the right practices of, customer communications. But because of AI, you have such an influx of, like, I don't want to say fake, but just like, overnight companies coming in, flooding the market. And it's hard for everyday consumers to, like, tell the difference, right? And so I think that some quality companies are getting frustrated and fed up with the amount of, like, counterfeit, fake material and the scams that are in the marketplace, which creates an overall cynical environment for most people. And then people don't pay attention anymore because they're tired of, like, having to distinguish between good and bad. But so the key is figuring out the right dynamics, to encourage and motivate people and companies to understand that being more, like, forthcoming with information is important, right? I think
Yeah.
that's part of it. But it's a challenge. I mean, I think everybody's using AI right now to their advantage in any way they possibly can. I'm not sure everyone's thinking about how to use it in a way that's authentic or in a good way.
Yeah. I'm a bit shocked by what you said, that when you speak about your company, people, or I don't know whether these are investors or potential clients, would say, how can you drive revenue from that?
Yeah.
Because it's like the the opportunity to actually have reliability and to create trust in such uncertain environment. Shouldn't this be the most important thing we're actually working on?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you if you wanted to finish the question.
I don't know whether it's a question. It's more to come back to what you said. I read that the market for ebooks, novels, is flooded, that the editors or online shops have to find a way, because they're AI generated models, millions of them created every day, just believing that if every book is bought for €1 a couple of times, they are making millions just by having AI generating novels and selling them. I am receiving daily pitches from companies who want to help me with lead generation, and all the email addresses don't have a company behind that. So they're just AI generated email addresses, I assume. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think the market is huge to, if I could show to the world that I'm a real human being, that that everything that I have learned so far, and that my clients are real, and that my product is real, all of these things, isn't that the real value that we need in the professional world moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so a few things. One is that, yeah, in terms of companies, I think companies do care, and they, like, trust is obviously very important. And Edelman does the survey every year about brand trust. And the difference probably is that the way you build trust, like, once again, so much in the last 10 years has been what influencer, what celebrity do you have that's promoting, supporting? It's reputation. A lot of it's reputation. I think the difference now is that what companies are slowly realizing is that the trust has to happen in the experience itself. And so when you say the market's flooded with all these books, when these companies, like, I get the same companies contacting me, and on one hand, I just dismiss them all, but on the other hand, I feel bad because I'm like, what if one of these is a legitimate person,
Exactly.
a legitimate company? And what that says to me is, in the actual experience itself, there needs to be a better way for me to understand or decipher or see which of these in these emails, who's real or not. I often like the trust act started because I was taking screenshots of so many emails and text messages, and I still do, and say, is this legitimate? Should I pay attention to this? Because I can't tell what is authentic anymore and what is not. And there are situations where I've had material that was real and legitimate, and I've bypassed it because I thought it was a scam. I just got an Evite invite for my son's birthday party that I thought was a scam, and I almost didn't respond. So this isn't reputation. I mean, Evite is a well-known brand, at least in the US. I don't know if it's global, but these are not reputational, right? These are in the moment, in the experience. So it's keeping up with the times. That's right. Especially with AI like recommending and generating and telling you, as you were saying, do you trust, like, what tools do we have? What knowledge do we have in the moment to understand how it's getting to that recommendation? Who is this, a real person? Where is it coming from? That is something that, I am trying to work on. I think there are people who also believe that the only way to solve this will be in a non-digital way, where you actually have to encounter and see the person, one-on-one. And of course, I think that is a very smart way to determine the authenticity of an individual. But in the digital world, we have so much work to do to help figure that out.
Yeah. And then it's almost ironic then that when we want to be productive and professional, so we are generating our emails with AI, and then they all sound the same, so they wouldn't pass the test of credibility because we can hear that the text is not generated by a human.
Yeah.
So maybe and if we would only go analog, then we wouldn't have this conversation. And I think everything that we have built, this global community that has been built since the pandemic, would be for nothing. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, at the end of the day, I don't think it's an option, really. I mean, I definitely believe that we have to continue using the tools at our disposal, and we can't just ignore it. So it's a way of figuring it out, but it's very challenging. I mean, I'm constantly using AI to get to the heart of an idea, and as I'm doing it, I'm like, am I losing my voice, right? So how do I make sure I have my voice included, but at the same time get to articulate the idea? And frankly, I don't know at the end of it all, if my idea has now become like AI-ified or whatever, the language of it, right? And so that's the other thing, is there's AI language and then there's ideas, and they're not the same thing. And being able to distinguish, I think there are a lot of people who are like, oh God, they can tell that this is just like a lot of AI language and there's no idea behind it.
Yeah.
But helping people, figure that out, like get to the point where they understand, I think that's, a lot of work needs to be done there.
Yeah. And then there's also the reality that none of our ideas are 100% our original ideas, because that's how ideas are created, right? We talk to people, we read, we stand on the shoulder of giants.
Yes.
So we cannot dismiss having AI supporting our idea generation and distilling the essence of it and making it better, because that's whether we do it with a human or with books or with AI, it actually doesn't matter. Maybe.
Yeah, no, I think what AI has introduced is this concept that things are constantly changing. There's nobody really owns anything specifically. Everything is kind of malleable. And that makes people really uncomfortable, right? That makes companies, that's why so many companies are confused, overwhelmed, because AI is almost a change agent, because there's nothing that's staying in place. And it goes back to, it's intuitively or naturally connected to innovation, because innovation says, how can I do something differently in a new way to have a better outcome? And a lot of the way AI is being used is for that, right? It's to fit, and that makes people uncomfortable because they have to change what they're currently doing. And so I think you're seeing that discomfort now with most companies. I guess I'm happy that it's AI creating the friction and not me. Somebody else for once being like, the person who, yeah, I think, ironically too, that's probably what I like about AI is because as somebody who naturally goes into a situation, it's like, how can I fix it? How can I improve it? How can I change it? Where are the cracks? That's what AI does, right? Because it's really hard to hide imperfections. AI will scrutinize and retrieve and break apart data and figure out what's missing and what's not. Now, it can also do a great job of glossing over things so it appears like it makes sense.
Yeah.
But
And then I can imagine that it's easier to take this from an AI than from a person because then we don't take it personally. It's so easy to then blame you, like pointing at things that don't make sense.
Yes.
And then you're the difficult one.
Yes. AI can be the difficult one. And I think you're seeing, I mean, a lot of people hate AI, because it's said, because they believe it's removing all of the emotion and making everything efficient. And I understand all the, I don't want all the jobs to disappear. But there's also things I understand the benefits, I can see both sides.
Yeah. What is something unprofessional that you would still advise others to do?
I would say that I think it's still important to do things to follow your ideas or act on your ideas before you have consensus always, especially if the implication or outcome isn't a risk to others. I think that you can do things and be innovative and make impact without waiting for other people's approval. That's something that I've always done, and that's pretty much helped me. There's a whole second part to that, which is then getting people to buy in and align around that. But I don't think waiting for approval or alignment is always needed if you're doing something that, like, once again, isn't, catastrophically negative or for everyone else. So I would say that.
Has it ever gone wrong for you?
It's never gone wrong for me to do things. No, it's never gone wrong. I've had more challenges saying things when I shouldn't be, out of turn, speaking out of turn, giving feedback out of turn, because that is involving other people, and you're suddenly, like, you're disrupting their system and their way of thinking and how they might approach something. So I've definitely done a lot of things on my own, which once again is good and bad because you get things done, you can accomplish a lot, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have the ultimate buy-in for long-term impact.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great food for thought.
Trying to think if there's anything else in my, I spend a lot of time thinking, like, what have I learned? What would I do differently? And it's hard because there's so many things that I naturally do and am accustomed and oriented towards. Yet I've also learned about how organizations and systems work and the ways in which you really need to pay attention to those systems in order to make the change you want to make, right? I mean, so much of innovation is, when I talk to people about careers and innovation, like 80% of innovation is change management.
And then it doesn't necessarily accommodate the canaries in the coal mine or the diversity in absorbing and managing information.
Yeah.
And communicating.
All of the above.
Yeah.
In ways that people feel comfortable. I mean, and you're holding hands with them, and you're making sure that their balance and system is intact. It's yeah.
I think this would be an entire different conversation. Organizations are actually, missing out on because they're not maybe safe enough to distinguish between, okay, that's just clear, honest conversation versus someone attacking and being.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think there are organizations that do that. I just think it takes time. And so that's another thing I've learned is patience, is being patient and waiting and spending more time listening. Not, that's something that I've definitely learned, because you cannot make change. You can't walk in and just change, and that maybe that's what AI is doing and disrupting so quickly, and there's no one to blame. But for people, that's not accepted. That's not accepted behavior. If you want to make change, you have to first really establish strong relationships and over time, and then you can get to the point where you can challenge. It's whether you have the patience and capacity to create those relationships and be part of that building process in order to, get to the point where you can then challenge it.
Which is very interesting because it circles back to the product that you're creating, but from a different angle. Creating, how can you show or create the trust that when you come in and disrupt the system, people can actually rely on, okay, it's not just a crazy person.
Yes.
But that there is something it's based on. So it's a very different angle on the trust and credibility. But
definitely. And that is, I still struggle with that part. That's why I'm working on the other part,
because maybe it's too close to home.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was a conversation without the script. Now it's your turn. I'm Miriam Hatmas, and this has been Unprofessionalism.